This is part 26 of my series on my N-gauge model railway project. Previous parts covered the project from its inception through the creation of the baseboard, selection and laying of track, building of scenic items, obtaining rolling stock, etc. The project is ongoing. Recent parts have also featured actual video of running on the layout and more in this part. The subject of this part is some Lone Star Treble-O model railway items that I picked up locally recently via an ad on Kijiji. And here you can see all of the Treble-O items that I got. The seller did also throw in an assortment of recycled N-gauge track, not Lone Star, and a couple of Lone Star road trucks in a larger scale. All of these items are stamped Lone Star, made in England. I bought them in London, Ontario, Canada. A bit of history here because it's interesting, at least to me. The company who made Lone Star products was actually called DCMT for Die-Cast Machine Tools Limited, and they were based initially in the northern suburbs of London and later had a factory in Hatfield, Hertfordshire. They started making toys before my time, just before the Second World War. They chose the name Lone Star for their toy products as cowboy items, toy guns and figures were a substantial part of their offerings. They moved into railways quite a bit later, first producing die-cast unmotorized models of railway locos and wagons towards the end of the 1950s, and then launching their Treble-O electric railways range in 1960. The Treble-O name came because the items were approximately half the scale of the most popular British gauge 00, or 00. This made these items essentially the first 2mm to the foot railway items to be marketed well before the advent of N-gauge. Lone Star track was actually a little bit narrower than N-gauge's 9mm at about 8.25mm. Lone Star locos, as this range was also branded, didn't actually last long. By 1965 the electric trains were discontinued, although unmotorized 2mm to the foot items were still produced for a while and sold mainly in Woolworths, sometimes also branded as Impy, and towards the end actually identified as N-gauge rather than Treble-O. Since the whole basis of the company was making die-cast items, almost all of the Lone Star Railways range was made of die-cast metal, both their rolling stock and their scenic items. They did also make some landscape items such as tunnels out of formed rubber, though I haven't personally handled any of those. Their locos were mostly diesels, and you don't often find them now, as they relied on rubber bands to relay the drive from the electric motor to the wheels, and this wasn't a system that was geared to running reliably in the long term. I suspect that many of their locos got thrown away when they ceased to work. It takes real dedication to find Lone Star locomotives and get them running now. There is a community of enthusiasts, mainly in the UK, but you're not at all likely to just run across a Lone Star engine in running condition these days. The other items, however, rolling stock, buildings, etc., turn up reasonably often in varying conditions, most often in the UK, but DCMT did make a serious push to export to America, making some American rolling stock also, so Lone Star stuff does turn up this side of the Atlantic. Though I must say I was surprised to find this collection offered so close to my home in Ontario. As you can see, I got 2 small stations, though one is incomplete, missing a ramp, 2 signal boxes, a footbridge, a crossing barrier, and 1 piece of rolling stock, a small breakdown crane. Small as breakdown cranes go, that is. Most heavier-duty breakdown cranes require a separate jib wagon, and the larger ones from the start of the 1930s on also use load-reducing bogies, meaning that to add a crane to a train you're talking 4 pieces of rolling stock generally, the crane itself, 2 load-reducing bogies, and a jib wagon. Anyway, this is a small single-piece breakdown crane. Lone Star rolling stock predated N-gauge considerably, so naturally it doesn't use rapido couplings, or indeed any form of coupling currently used in N-gauge or N-scale. Lone Star couplings are essentially just a scaled-down version of the horizontal bar and hook system used by the main British makers Hornby and Triang for their 00 and TT gauge trains. Here's another view of the back coupling on my Lone Star crane. It shouldn't really sit up as high as that, somebody's bent it. I wasn't too sure whether I would be able to couple the crane to any of my stock using these couplings. I also wasn't sure whether the crane would even run on N-gauge tracks, as it was made for a slightly narrower gauge. Better that, I suppose, than if it had been made for a wider gauge. My first thought was that maybe I could replace the bogies on the crane with standard N-gauge bogies, but the bogies were pivoted on the die-cast frame using rivets, so it wasn't going to be at all easy, if possible. It appeared that someone had bent the couplings on the crane, maybe to try to couple them to different couplers. I tried, and I was in fact able to couple the crane quite securely to a regular Rapido coupling simply by engaging the bent hook into the Rapido knuckle. Indeed, the connection that this made was frankly more positive than the connections often made normally by Rapido couplings. It certainly doesn't look elegant when you look at it closely, but I haven't had any trouble with it letting go. I'm not a big fan of Rapido couplings. They don't look very good, being large and clunky, and they don't couple very reliably. But I put up with them at the moment, as they are still the standard, and all the UK rolling stock that I buy comes with them, so it would be a really major job to try and switch everything over to something else. My impression is that the majority of British N-gauge modelers still use Rapido couplings, whereas most US N-scale modelers switch to some type of smaller knuckle coupler. Anyway, I was able to get the Lone Star crane running on the layout quite successfully. Here it is behind the Graham Farish 3F Ginty tank logo and a Pico kit wagon. Here's a close-up of that little train. It really runs fine. The crane does tend to wobble noticeably every time it goes over points, crossings, etc., but being die-cast it is quite heavy, and it has twin bogies, so it's stable enough that so far the wobbling hasn't actually derailed it once. Here it goes up to the viaduct. I put one of the Lone Star stations and one of the signal boxes on the layout, and you can see them coming up. I think the colours of the Lone Star buildings look a little strange, and the paintwork is also chipped, so I may well end up repainting them if they're going to stay on the layout. I hope Lone Star collectors wouldn't consider that vandalism. The post box red roof on that station seems a bit much to me. Come to that, the crane itself could benefit from a paint job. I think Lone Star leant towards bright colours as they thought they would appeal to children. I don't think anyone could object to those platforms getting a paint job. The paint really hasn't lasted at all well on the metal castings. Come to think of it, the paint always came off the die-cast Dinky toys and similar cars that I had as a kid. I did also put the Lone Star Bridge on the layout. It seems to have pretty good clearance, and even with the slightly raised Kato track, so far all the locos I have tried passed under the Lone Star Bridge okay, albeit some of them nearly touching it. Anyway, now let's see a little bit of running video. Okay, let's just see if we can see the Lone Star crane running on the network. Well, let's maybe take it the other way so it comes towards us. It wobbles like anything. You'll see it wobble here when it goes. See how it wobbles whenever it goes over anything, because it doesn't have much clearance underneath, but it keeps going. Because it's heavy and it's got bogies. Now it's going underneath the Lone Star Bridge, which I've got there for the moment. I don't know whether I'm going to leave that there, but we got it there for now, and it wobbles again as it goes over the points. Now where we're going to have problems is when we get to the level crossing after this station, and the problem we're going to have is not with the Lone Star. Oh, yeah, that's what I thought. See, the problem is that level crossing essentially acts as an uncoupling track for regular Rapido couplings. Nope. So it's kind of tricky to get a wagon across it. A wagon with a very free coupling. Yeah, there, we managed to get it across by going across fast. The Rapido won't come uncoupled because it's got this weird hook that's bent in there, but know, shall we chance our arm and try and move him onto the inner line here? See if he'll go across the crossover onto the inner line. Moving back towards it, haven't we? Very few things will actually go across that crossover without stopping. Longer engines will. There we go. Okay, and now we're bringing. Now see, I've got a Lone Star station and a Lone Star signal box there, just the way I got them. If they're gonna stay there, I think they're gonna get repainted. We'll see, but. So there you go. The wagon in between is one of the Pico kit wagons that I built. And the engine is the Graham Farish Ginty, which is, you can actually buy. It's one of the few LMS engines you can still currently buy. The LMS, the Graham Farish JIT 3F Ginty tank engine in a LMS black. Whoops. We'll set the crossover back, keep him on the inside. There you go. I've changed the points now to move him past around the intersection, which will basically mean, well, it's not banked down all the sidings, obviously, but he's been round all the main line track. Once he does this, he should come in here and go around this section through bills. Then I don't think that part of the level crossing course is a problem. It's the other bit, the ratio bit. Famous last words. Maybe it did cause a problem. There's actually nothing really wrong with that coupling. If anything, it's too right. It's too free is its problem. So any little thing that pushes it up tends. There you go. We'll stop him then maybe at the at the Lone Star station. Not that there's any reason you'd really stop a breakdown crane at a station, but there you go. Okay. Let's see if we can have a little look at the Lone Star crane running. A little closer. I don't know how well this camera really works for close-up video, but and the engine now seems to have decided it doesn't want to work. They do that sometimes, don't they? But really surprisingly, this Lone Star crane runs fine on this Kato track. Surprisingly. And for completeness, let's just try and watch him running past the Lone Star station and the signal box. We were doing nicely with a crawl there, but then we started to go up the hill. And for completeness, let's just see if we can see the Lone Star crane going under the Lone Star Bridge here. he still gets over them.